Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to introduce you to two new plants which are going to be giant foliage plants in my garden here in North Scotland. So the first one here is a Zantedeschia. So this is basically a Calla Lily, or sometimes known as an arum lily, but this is a slightly unusual variety. So there's a few different Calla Lilies. This Zantedeschia is a hybrid. It's a hybrid with the Aophia variety. The Aophia variety is slightly larger and it's actually hardy in my part of Scotland. So this type of lily wasn't one that I originally thought of for my garden, but I noticed a lot of houses in my area have this lily growing. It grows about 3 foot tall, so about 1 meter in height, and it seems to do really well in our town, so I thought that's probably a good one to go for. It'll be nice and tropical. And then I found this variety which is called Hercules, and this can actually grow to about 2 meters in height, so well over twice the height of a normal variety. It's not quite as hardy, so the normal variety can handle maybe -5, -10 especially if it's underground and it has a decent layer of soil on top of the roots and the culms. This one I think is about -5 it can handle, so I will need to give this a nice thick mulch if we have a particularly hard spell of cold weather. But otherwise it should do well in my climate. Zantedescias, they come from South Africa, but they come from slightly higher altitude, and they can handle the cooler temperatures here quite well in Scotland. This, as I say, is a hybrid, so it doesn't have quite the hardiness. Some of the other plant it was probably crossed with was one of the more tender varieties, which is how it's given it the extra large size. It's very small at the moment, not much to see at all, but this will grow massive leaves. The leaves will probably be about 30, 40, maybe even 60 centimeters across, growing to a height of about 1 meter or 2, and then the flowers themselves are just going to look like giant white calla lilies, but the flowers will probably grow to about 2 meters in height, and the leaves are quite nice in this variety. They've got little white specks. There's no white specks showing on this leaf. This is just the first one to come up after it's come out of dormancy, so there's not much to show. I'm currently filming this at the end of January, so that's why it's so dormant. This variety, if it's not hard frost, it's what's known as a semi-evergreen, so it's evergreen if it's not a hard frost. If it is a hard frost, it will die back down and lose its foliage. So I know the ones in my local area, they survived last winter no problem, but we only had about -3 last winter, but -5 this year, and they've all been taken down to the ground level. So that's about the level that the foliage can survive on the hardier version. My version is probably going to be at -2, -3. We'll probably kill out the foliage, but I won't know until I start growing it and see how it does. It also depends on what position I have it in the garden. The biggest ones I've seen in my town are on south-facing walls, where they have a bit of shelter and an extra warmth from the heat, so that's probably why they've done so well. So as I say, it can handle cooler temperatures a bit better than some tropical looking plants. This plant, if it's actually in like a more of a Mediterranean style climate where it's very hot and dry over the summer, it has a double dormant period, so it will go dormant in summer when it's really hot and dry, and it can actually go dormant in winter as well if it's too cold. In my climate it will go dormant in winter because it'll be cold, but if you're in a Mediterranean climate, you'll probably have this grow over the winter, spring and autumn, but go dormant in the summer. My cool summers might be a slight issue for it because it might be a bit too cold. We only have about 18 degrees on average as a maximum during the day, about 8 or 10 degrees at night, and that's in the middle of the summer. So I'll try and keep this in a sheltered location, give it plenty of sunlight. If you're in a warmer location, these actually need dapple shade, but I think here in North Scotland, looking at the ones in my town that have done the best, they're always in the full sunshine. So I'm going to give this as much sunlight as possible, put it in a nice sunny location. It should get to a nice size. I'm not going to have this outside in the garden quite yet. It's still very cold. This is a young plant. The new growth coming through will get frosted off, and there's not a lot of root system in there for it to continue growing, so I need to really I need to build up the energy supplies in that root system before I plant it in the garden. It's going to take probably 2 or 3 years at least before it gets to its full size. I suspect this will look like a normal kind of Calla Lily for the first couple of years. Average size leaves. If it does flower, which this is supposed to do from a younger age, it will just be a lot smaller in height, more like a normal Calla Lily. So I'll be growing this one and giving you guys regular updates. This doesn't need repotting or anything at the moment. It looks like a decent sized pot for the size of the plant. I'm going to be putting this probably under my grow lamps for a little bit, try and get the growth sped up a little bit so I can get it to a good size. I need to get this to a decent size quickly, otherwise I'll be waiting years for this to get nice size. If I waited until summer and put this out, it would probably look quite small if I just had it on a sunny windowsill. So I'm going to make it grow much faster under some heat, under some grow lamps, and then when it comes to March time, I can take it out of the grow lamps, just have it in my conservatory. That'll be warm and sunny enough, and then come May time, when the hardest frosts have gone, but even a slight light frost should be okay, I can then put this outside in the garden in a nice sunny position, and it should grow well. This is the plant that likes a lot of moisture. You can actually grow it as a bog plant on the side of a pond, so I need to keep this very well watered and try and put it in a damp location if I can. So my other plant, which is a lot less common than this one, or as I say, Calla Lilies and this type of lily, they're not too unusual. It's the only unusual thing about this one is the variety, which is called Hercules. It's a particularly large variety, so it's 2 or 3 times the size of a normal one. But this plant at the back is much more unusual, and it was a bit difficult for me to find. This is what's known as a tree dahlia. The Latin name is Dahlia imperialis. And this grows very differently to your average dahlia. It is a different species. Most dahlias are hybrids, and they've been crossbred with several different species, but they don't normally have much genetics from this species, and that's because this is an absolutely giant dahlia, and some places on the internet say it can grow to 8 to 10 meters in height. I'm certainly not expecting that here. Most people reckon it can grow to about 3 or 4 meters, which I think is the height it gets to if it gets frosted down to the ground level and you have a really long hot summer. If you have very mild winters, you don't have frost, then you can maybe get to the 8 or 10 meters because the stem will survive, and then it can keep that height. But I won't probably be keeping much of the stem. The stem will probably be killed off most years by the frost, and I might have to dig up the tubers on this as well. If this stays in a cold, wet soil, there's a real risk that it could rot off. So I need to make sure I dig up the tubers for this every year and keep them somewhere sheltered. But once the tubers get really large and it gets a bit difficult for me to dig them up every year, I'll start leaving this in the soil, but just put a really heavy layer of mulch on it to shelter it and keep it from getting any hard frosts. And then I might just take a small cutting and keep that inside over winter as an insurance policy in case there's a very hard frost. So this is very frost sensitive, certainly the foliage. The slightest frost, the foliage will just darken and die off. But the reason I'm growing this is for the foliage. This grows really fast. This should grow to about 2 meters in my climate if I keep it well fed. As I say, if you're in a warmer climate with higher temperatures, you can probably get this to 3 or 4 meters in 1 year. And if you have a very mild autumn, you can also get this to flower. I probably won't be able to get this to flower unless I really extend the season, and that's what I'm going to be trying to do this year. So this flowers very late in the year, normally November time, December time. But we get our first frost quite often in September, so the chances of me getting flowers from just leaving it growing outside is very small. And even with normal dahlias which flower earlier, I have to normally bring them ahead by forcing them under higher temperatures and grow lamps anyway. So with this one I definitely need to do that. So what I'm going to be doing in the second half of this video is I'm going to be repotting it, because I've looked in the bottom and it looks like there's quite a lot of tubers, quite big roots, so it looks like it already needs a bigger pot. Looking at the size of the stem, it was probably about 1 meter or 2 last year, so it looks like it's already quite a vigorous plant. So I'm expecting once this starts to grow, it's going to be very strong. I'm going to probably leave it only on 2 or 3 stems. What normally happens with dahlias is they resprout from the base and you end up with lots of shoots, but I want this to get really tall, so I will thin out the shoots and keep it to a minimum. That way I can get more height and less bushiness. As I say, it's the foliage I'm going for. It's got massive leaves. The leaves are made up of lots of little leaflets, so it looks like lots of little leaves, but it's actually just one giant leaf. So I have lots of foliage over the summer, and by the end of summer I should get a good height. And it should just look like a giant herbaceous plant with a nice tropical effect. So the way I'm going to be trying to get this to flower this year is I'm going to start it much earlier. If I was to plant this in the garden, because of the cold climate we have here in Scotland, it probably wouldn't start growing until May time, and then it doesn't have a very hot summer, so it grows quite slowly over our summer. It just won't do too well. So what I'll be doing with this is I'm going to start it growing now, which is the end of January. I'm going to repot this, give it a bit more space, put it in a warm location. Once it starts to sprout, I'll also put it onto some grow lamps. Then hopefully by March it will be a decent size, and I can put it out in my conservatory, because I'll probably run out of grow light space once this gets quite large. Then I'll keep it in my conservatory until about late May, early June. By then the temperature's warmed up outside, should be about 18-20 degrees during the day, and about 10 degrees at night. Shouldn't be much risk of frost. I can then plant this in the garden, already a large plant. Hopefully it's about 1 meter tall by then, and then it's at a good head start and it should get to a good size by the end of summer. And hopefully if I've pushed it ahead enough with some early growth in spring, I might even get flowers, although I'm not expecting it here in North Scotland. So that's one of the biggest issues about growing things here in North Scotland, is how late the season begins. and the fact that we have our best sunshine at the beginning of the season. The reason that makes such a big difference here is when you've got a small plant and it's only got 2 or 3 small leaves in June time, although it might have been growing for a month, it's going to be a small plant, not many leaves, it can't really make the most of the sunshine. And by the time it does have big leaves, it's July. Most of our plants grow really well over July, and then come August the light starts to diminish, the temperatures also start to drop in the evening, and the plants just slow right down. The best light levels are actually April, May, June and July, but because May and April the plants are dormant, they can't benefit at all from the sun. And even in June, if it's a herbaceous plant, they might not have their leaves fully established, so they don't have the leaf area to absorb all that light and make a lot of use from it and get some really good growth. So I'd also like to talk a bit about the climate that this grows in naturally. It doesn't really get a whole lot of frost where it naturally grows. It comes from Mexico and some other Central American countries. It tends to grow in hills or low down on mountains around 1,000 or 2,000 meters. So this isn't used to the really hot climate. So if you're in very hot Mediterranean summer or in the true tropics, it'd probably be a little bit too hot for this plant. That gives me a slight advantage. Although in its home environment it does average around 25 degrees plus during the summer, so it is warmer than what we have, which is why the growth will be a bit slower for me. But as I say, if you're in a really hot climate, this is actually not the best plant. It will probably wilt quite a lot. Where it comes from naturally, it's not the frost and winter that makes it go dormant, it's the dry season. So the dry season is their winter, but basically this will go dormant in their winter. When it's a bit cooler and when it gets very dry, it goes dormant. It has massive tubers to store all the energy and all the moisture it needs to survive the dry period. And then come summer, because it's in the hills, it captures a lot of rain. There's lots of rainfall, warmer temperatures, and it will grow really rapidly and make the most of that season. So that's why it doesn't do so well in very hot countries. It's a slightly cooler mountainous climate, but it's very high rainfall. So if it was in the Mediterranean, it's a complete opposite kind of season. Mediterranean is wet winter, dry summer. This is dry winter, wet summer, so it needs that moisture, and that's why I'll need to keep this very well watered. It's the same with most dahlias. They don't like to rot off, they don't like to get too wet, especially in the winter, but in the summer, if you don't keep them well watered, they will suffer and they'll wilt quite easily. So we'll see how it does in my climate. As I say, I suspect it'll be a bit slow because it's a bit too cold for it, but if I keep it well watered and I give it lots of feed, I'm hoping that I can still get some decent growth even if it is a bit cold for it here. So because I know the growth of this plant is going to be very rapid with those really large tubers, I'm going to give this a really big pot. This is the biggest one I've got to hand at the moment. The soil mix I'm going to be using is a mixture of multi-purpose compost and soil-based loam compost, but probably about 2/3 soil-based loam and 1/3 multi-purpose compost, and a little bit of perlite in there for extra drainage. The perlite's not so important during the summertime though. When this is an active growth, dahlias don't mind quite a lot of moisture, but you certainly don't want the soil to be too wet because then you will have rot problems. I also find dahlias do best in a soil-based mix, which is why I've gone quite heavy with the soil and the loam, and I don't have quite so much multi-purpose compost. They do like a bit of multi-purpose, a bit of organic matter or multi-purpose compost mixed in as well. It just gives it a bit more moisture retention and a bit more nutrient capacity as well. So that helps it get a bit more lush, but I don't want it just pure multi-purpose compost. I've grown dahlias in that before and they just seem to do a bit better in a soil-based compost. So I'm going to have a look at the roots first of all, see how they're looking, see if we've got any large tubers. So that's a really good sign already. Got nice healthy roots even though this is dormant. Doesn't look like it has any massive tubers. There's one there, you can see, and there's probably some more deeper in, but I don't really want to damage the roots too much. Part of me is tempted to break apart the roots as you would with a tree, because this is a tree dahlia, but part of me also thinks maybe I should not break the roots apart, so I'm not too sure. Probably leave the roots unbroken for now, see how it grows, but who knows, I might regret this in the future if it causes issues. So I'm just going to plant it at a similar depth to where it was before, maybe just a tiny bit deeper, because it does seem to be putting out little side shoots there, and also I want to make sure that this is deep enough so that if there's any hard frost early on in the autumn and I forget to go and take it inside, it's just going to kill off the top growth, and lower down in the ground where the tubers are, it should be protected if I planted that a little bit deeper. So that's it now planted up in a much larger pot, and although this plant pot is much bigger than the original one, it's probably still going to be too small because it's going to grow really rapidly, very fast growing plant, and within 3 or 4 months this will probably be needing to be repotted again. But hopefully by then this should be a decent size and the weather will have warmed up enough that I can put this out in the garden, so I shouldn't need to put this in another pot. This should be good enough until probably May time when I put this out in the garden. I'll probably give you guys an update on this and the giant Calla Lily once they put on a bit more growth. This one, I'll see what I can do with grow lamps and things. It's a little bit tricky because this is such a big plant. I've got several other plants that need to go into the grow box, so I might not put this in the grow box straight away until I see some new growth on the top, just to save space. But I will heat this up, try and keep it above 20 degrees if I can, and also I'll make sure it's well watered. That should encourage it to come into growth. And dahlias, they're very easy to come out of dormancy. They don't really need a lot of time, or they don't need a lot of encouragement to come out of dormancy. As soon as you get a bit of warmth and a bit of moisture, they really just start to grow quite quick. So I'll give you guys an update in a few months' time. By then I'm hoping this will be putting on some nice new shoots, and the giant Calla Lily should have a few larger leaves. That one's going to be a bit slower growing. It's got a small tuber. It doesn't have a lot of stored energy, so it's going to be quite slow. It'll be getting all its energy from the sun or from the grow lamps. This one will be getting a lot of energy from its tuber and also energy from the sun and grow lamps, so this will be a lot faster growing with all that extra energy coming up from the tubers.